Dave Lombardo, how are you?
I'm good, Roberto. Thanks for having me.
No, always. I'm a fan. I'm a fan. David, just tell people who you are and what you do, and so we can get right into it.
So I'm host of the Capitol Pressroom, a daily public radio show syndicated all over New York State, and I also host Dispatches from Planet Albany, a podcast that airs once a week. That's kind of a insider look at the Capitol, and I've been bouncing around here in one job or another for over 15 years now.
That's great, Dave. Let's go right into what people want to know. What's happening with the budget?
Not a lot as we talk on Friday, April 4th in the afternoon. It's pretty quiet here at the Capitol. Obviously, all the state lawmakers have gone home and they're waiting basically for briefings from the legislative leaders on their discussions with the governor. And according to Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie, who briefed the press on Thursday, it seems like there's three major outstanding issues right now, and that's changes to involuntary commitments, changes to the discovery laws, and restrictions on mask uses in public. But right now, all of that's happening, those debates privately behind closed doors.
Who are you hearing based on whatever intel you're getting is holding the line? There's a three-legged stool there, right? With
Yeah,
the governor, the executive, obviously holding the most the power, right? They they're
right.
they're they're the ultimate decider. But in terms of the three people that make the decisions, who is holding the line based on what you're hearing?
Well, on an issue like discovery reform, it appears to be the Assembly Democrats and, by extension, Speaker Carl Hastie, who are sticking to their guns, so to speak. Governor Kathy Hochul, at the urging of district attorneys, including in New York City, has been trying to change some of the discovery law requirements that were adopted in 2019. And Speaker Hastie, based on what I've been hearing out of those negotiations, has been the party, more so than the Senate Democrats and Senate Majority Leader Andrew Stewart Cousins, to push back against the governor on these discovery reforms. I guess the question is, how long are they going to push back for? And is there a middle ground? Because I've been hearing that the DAs are kind of balking at some of the pushback from the Assembly Dems. They really want it their way. And from what I'm told, the governor hasn't really been willing to compromise. She has been saying, well, these are what the DAs want, and that's what I'm going to bat for.
Interesting, Dave. What's your over under on when this gets done? If you were a betting
So
man.
Well, I am a betting man, so if people are taking action on this, I would love to get a piece of that action. But in January, my prediction was that they were going to finish voting on April 11th. That's the day before the start of Passover. And so if that timeline had come to fruition, we would have had a deal announced maybe Monday, April 7th, or Tuesday, April 8th, and allow for some time to have bills printed and multiple days of voting. But now, as we talk, and the lack of white smoke coming from the second floor, so to speak, I'm more inclined to think that a budget's not going to get done until after Easter on April 20th. What that means for the interim is hard to say because lawmakers were supposed to have a vacation from the 14th through the 25th. And I imagine if they don't have a deal on a budget next week, the governor's not going to give them some 2 week extender that allows them to go to their districts or to plan vacations. She's going to have a much shorter budget extender, and they're going to have to be back here the week of, say, the 14th to either negotiate a budget or pass short extenders. But if you asked me when I had to place a bet for, depending on the odds, I'd say we get a deal maybe announced on the 21st, finish voting the 25th.
David, I want a top down analysis on your part. I most of the time I talk to city reporters or city operators and movers and shakers. Now I have the opportunity to talk to someone who's, no pun intended, a creature of Albany. But yet again, where this New York City is obviously the economic engine of the state, but the power lies in the state, right, in the capital, where the governor is ultimately the ultimate decider on what moves and what doesn't move, right? Hence, Tin
Mm-hmm.
Cup Day, where the mayor of New York City has to come up and ask the members and ask the leadership in Albany for money and for resources. What do you make of former Governor Cuomo, um, how he's polling, and obviously the shift for someone who was governor, whose father was governor, now to running for mayor. What's your analysis? And is this the comeback of all comebacks if he pulls it off?
Well, I don't know if this counts as analysis, but what I'll say I'm most looking forward to in a potential Cuomo mayoral administration is the idea of him having to come up for Tin Cup Day, as you referenced. This is when the municipal leaders all over the state come up to Albany for a joint legislative budget hearing and make their case for their municipality's fiscal needs. And the idea of former Governor Andrew Cuomo having to come to Albany and testify and take questions from state lawmakers, many of whom called on him to resign, and even before he resigned in 2021, had testy relationships with, that, in my book, would be great drama. And it's complicated by the fact that you're going to have potentially these state lawmakers from New York City who hate this guy's guts, but if he's mayor, he's going to be advocating for some of the things that they want, and it's going to create some strange bedfellows. And I just would love to see some of these state lawmakers have to squirm and walk some sort of line between calling him out for the past policies that they might have hated or the things he's pushing now, while also teaming up with him, so to speak, because they might be allied on issues, whereas Governor Hochul might be the odd man out in that conversation. So as someone who's based in Albany, that's really what I'm excited about. And, you know, from my vantage point, 2.5 hours north of New York City, boy, I'd rather be Andrew Cuomo running for mayor than any of the other Democrats in this race, even if we are talking about an election with ranked choice voting and a slightly different dynamic at play in terms of what it takes to get across the finish line.
What is a potential uh, Andrew Cuomo mayoral team mean for Governor Hochul? She holds all the cards still. She's in charge.
Yeah, she might be in charge, but they, again, will have overlapping interests in a lot of ways. If you have to think about who she's going to be more closely aligned with at different levels of government, it's not going to be the federal chief executive, President Donald Trump. It would be a future New York City mayor of Andrew Cuomo. And I think a lot of her policies and priorities stem from New York City. And I think that would be, again, so awkward and uncomfortable to watch. And I can't imagine they would ever do public remarks together in the future, but there would definitely be times where their interests would overlap. Maybe Governor Hochul would try to make him jump through some hoops the way Andrew Cuomo made de Blasio jump through hoops. But as we've seen with Mayor Eric Adams and his shaky relationship with Governor Kathy Hochul for the last year, there's only so far that she's willing to exert her power before she kind of lets those other municipal leaders run a course and do their thing. So it would be one unprecedented show.
David, what is the new now? The mayor's running as an independent. He's saying I'm still a Democrat. I was looking at something recent where he didn't push back hard on congestion pricing. Now,
No.
how many, what cards does he have to play now when there's still a lot of time left on the clock? Rebudget, discovery, something he's vocal about, and his police commissioner's vocal about, and now there's also a handful of months left till the end of session. What is the dynamic now between him and the governor, considering that he's now shifted from Democrat to independent? The other day there was a picture with him and Rudy Giuliani and Newsmax, right? So it seems like he's leaning more and more right. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Mayor Adams has never been a very present force here in Albany. His first year in office, he was not very effective in lobbying Albany. He was much more impactful the following 2 years in 2023 and 2024. And I give his team a lot more credit than I think he gets for any of that. And I think particularly a former state senator, Diane Savino, who works for the mayor and was in the Capitol this past week pushing on some of the issues that New York City cares about. For example, a child care voucher program where the city is looking for hundreds of millions of dollars from the state in order to prevent thousands of families from losing their access to care. So I kind of think it's going to be business as usual in terms of the city's lobbying of the state. Uh, like I said, the mayor's never been a huge presence there in terms of coming up to Albany, and I think he's got this team that still is obviously in place. What the rest of his term looks like, though, and cards he has to play, I don't think he's got a lot of cards left to play unless there's something stuck up his sleeve, so to speak. It seems like he's running out the clock, both in terms of his actual administration, but also with his political future, because I don't put a lot of stock in an independent campaign run by someone who doesn't have a lot of money, has very limited fundraising prowess moving forward, and their name is kind of like mud in New York City.
David, what do you make of the entire scenario of ranked choice and multiple people running? Sliwa now, uh, likely the Republican nominee, former Mayor Adams, Governor Cuomo potentially, right? But again, there's still a lot of time left, right? Anything can happen, and people, the right random voter is not paying attention. So there's a lot of time left on the clock. What are some surprises you think, or what are things you don't think people are looking at right now that you think could be more impactful in that outcome?
So I think one of the less reported on variables in this race is what the Working Families Party does in terms of their ballot line, because they've made it clear that they don't want to give it to Andrew Cuomo. And as opposed to a statewide election where they end up backing Andrew Cuomo in 2014 and 2018, despite primarying him on the Democratic line, it seems like they're more open to fielding a challenger if he ends up being the Democratic nominee. And what we have to remember is that while there's ranked choice voting in the Democratic primaries in June, my understanding is that's not the case in November when you have a traditional general election, which means you just have to get the most votes of all the candidates as opposed to a majority of the votes. And I think that creates a real wild card scenario. So if I'm the Working Families Party, and let's say Assembly Member Zoran Mamdani performs particularly well in the primary, do we give our line to him, or do we say, boy, I don't know if he can win a general election in New York when the electorate looks a little bit different? So do we give it to State Senator Zellner Myrie, who has more of a moderate appeal? Do we give it to someone like New York City Comptroller Brad Lander, who has run citywide before? So I think that's one of the storylines to watch as it becomes probably more and more clear that Andrew Cuomo is the favorite to win the Democratic line. I personally don't give a lot of credence to the ability of a Republican or an independent Mayor Adams to win in November, but there's a lot of time, I think 7 months at this point between now and November. We'll start to see people really amp up their campaign spending for the primaries now that April is here and people are actually qualifying for the ballot. So I'm really excited to see what this sort of unprecedented time in New York City politics brings.
David, what are your thoughts on the state members, the folks that rep or representatives of state and their campaigns? Senator Ramos, Senator Myrie, Assembly Member Mamdani, former Assembly Member Michael Blake. I hope I'm
Well,
not forgetting or missing anyone. I think that's pretty much it. What are your thoughts? As again, the Times wrote a piece about how during the legislative session they have to do the up and down, back and forth, and how
yeah.
sometimes that complicates the campaigning.
Well, let's take them from least interesting to most interesting. The campaign by now perennial candidate Michael Blake is probably the least interesting to me. He just seems focused on getting his name out there. Senator Jessica Ramos, a big labor voice here in Albany and a Queens Democrat. Obviously, her campaign never took off, and I don't think it will. State Senator Zellner Myrie is someone who I thought was kind of a natural fit as a counterbalance to Mayor Adams. He really has not resonated with anyone maybe he's able to get his name out there more. Maybe there's some sort of consensus that rallies around him. I think the introduction of Adrienne Adams into the race probably hurt him. I think the establishment that turned to her probably should have turned to Zellner Myrie for a serious center left alternative to Andrew Cuomo. But the candidate that I think I'm most interested in and likely is going to have the most staying power between now and the June primaries, other than Andrew Cuomo, is Assemblymember Zohran Mamdani. I think that it's easy to write off someone who has this big social media presence as not having a substantive campaign, but I think it's translating to real boots on the ground support. I think his name is getting out there. Obviously, he has the most online support, but I think he is clearly emerged as the main alternative to Andrew Cuomo. And I guess what I'm curious about moving forward is if he's able to frame his message in this sort of economic populism that resonates with people and is successful in not turning people off by pivoting into lanes where progressives typically have seen roadblocks and typically come up against sort of immovable voting blocks, like language around defunding the police, something he's been loath to say in recent months, if not years. So I'm keeping my eye on Zohran Mamdani, who I also give a lot of credit for still making it up to Albany every day for session, it seems, and then hiking back to New York City to work on his campaign.
What are you working on these days, David?
So right now, we just had an interview with the New York State DMV about the transition over to the Real ID and enhanced driver's license for New Yorkers who want to fly come May 7th. But the thing that I was really excited about that we worked on this week was an episode of our podcast, Dispatches from Planet Albany, which people can download wherever they get podcasts. And we talked with Assemblymember Emily Gallagher, a Brooklyn Democrat, about what life is actually like when lawmakers are in this sort of budget purgatory. And she told us about visiting the local mall here, walking around the Capitol complex at night, and it was a really fresh take on kind of the boredom that lawmakers deal with at this point. So, Dispatches from Planet Albany, if I could plug that podcast.
That's great. Predictions. Give me three predictions.
Three predictions. Okay. One, I would say that we're going to end up with some version of the governor's rebate check proposal in the final budget. That was something that would be worth, I think, $300 for individuals, $500 for families. I think some version of that is going to survive into the final budget. For another prediction that maybe is more New York City specific, I mentioned child care access vouchers. I don't think the state is going to come through with a lot of money in the state budget to make up that hole. Maybe they close part of it. Maybe they do some eligibility stuff. But I think a lot of kids are going to be looking for childcare support after this budget. And then lastly, I'll give you one that's a little further down the road, and that has to do with Governor Kathy Hochul. If she runs again in 2026, I don't see any reason right now why she won't be the Democratic nominee. There's obviously a lot of excitement about Richie Torres in some corners of the world and some speculation about what Antonio Delgado might do. But right now, I'm betting on Kathy Hochul to be the Democratic nominee in 2026 for governor and for her to win, regardless of whether she takes on Bruce Blakeman, who I think's a more likely GOP candidate than Mike Lawler. So that's a fourth
Why
prediction for
why
you.
why do you think people are missing in terms of like the low polling, which is I think the reason why people think there's an avenue? I know that
Yeah.
the governor's a prodigious fundraiser.
Yep.
What
People discount the importance of being the incumbent, and I think they discount the name recognition that she brings, both positive and negative. And I think people are going to be loath to challenge her. I think the people who might be most credible, someone like Hakeem Jeffries, who obviously has a future now as the future speaker, is kind of the only person that I think of in Democratic politics who has the largesse to take on someone like Kathy Hochul, because for the most part, you're not going to see any of these institutional players like the teachers unions, like say 1199, actually jump ship in a Democratic primary if Kathy Hochul is running. The power of incumbency goes a very long way, and that's why I'm sticking with Kathy Hochul if I had to make a bet, and I have actually.
Make one more prediction. Who do you think is the next big endorsement in the coming NYC mayoral race? Obviously, we saw
Boy,
Congressmember Greg Meeks recently, and a lot of the Southeast Queens electeds, which people view as a shot at or damaging to Speaker Adrian Adams. Who do you think tips next? Is it a big labor union, or is it a power broker like former state senator, Congressmember Espaillat, who moves votes?
Yeah, I have to claim ignorance to a certain degree, but I will say that as someone who is interested in these players who have the interest in New York City and the state, I'm curious what Letitia James and Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie are going to do, because
Mm.
the Bronx, as far as I'm aware, has not been super involved in this race to date. And Speaker Hastie, speaking with the media on Thursday, basically said, "Oh, I'm so focused on the budget, I haven't even thought about Mayor Cuomo for mayor." So I am interested to see what he does. In the past, New York City politics, there's been that unholy alliance between Queens and the Bronx. Does that hold true here? I don't think so. And I'm curious whether they can be a major player in terms of rallying support behind someone that isn't Andrew Cuomo.
David, thank you so much for your time. I know it's the waiting game up there for you and for others, but I want to thank you for taking the time. And anything you want to add or mention that I forgot to ask?
No, thanks for letting me chat. Love the sound of my own voice. And please, listeners, if you want to hear more, check out Dispatches from Planet Albany. It's a WCNY podcast available wherever you download your favorite shows.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you. Have a great weekend. Bye bye.